The dust rose in thick, slow waves as the sun melted behind the dry hills of Red Valley, bleeding the sky into shades of copper and bruised violet. The land out here had never been gentle. It was carved from hardship and salted with old grief, and the people who lived in it wore that truth somewhere behind their eyes, a quiet resignation that said the world was not always fair, but it was theirs, and they would hold onto it with both hands until God himself asked for it back. Red Valley sat low in a shallow basin between two ridges that curved around it like the arms of a man who couldn't decide whether he was offering a hug or a headlock. The town had perhaps 200 souls, give or take the drifters who passed through and the miners who hadn't found anything worth staying for. There was a church with a leaning steeple, a livery stable that smelled of old straw and honest labor, a sheriff's office with a flag that had seen better decades. And right at the center of it all, like a heartbeat in a chest, stood Hart's General Supply. Wide-fronted, rough pine boards, a hand-painted sign, and a lantern in the window that burned every single night until Lily Hart came home. Henry Hart had lit that lantern every evening for 11 years. He started the night his wife Margaret passed, when Lily was just 8 years old and already showing the same stubborn kindness that had made her mother beloved in this town. The lantern was so Margaret could find her way home if she ever came back. Later, when Lily was old enough to understand, he said it was for her too. In truth, it was both. That small, steady flame was Henry Hart's entire remaining heart, sent in glass and oil and held out to the dark world as an offering. Lily knew this. She thought about the lantern every evening as she swept the front step and turned the sign from open to closed. She thought about her father's worn hands and quiet strength, and she told herself that someday, when the drought broke, when the cattle prices came back, she would find a way to give him peace in return for all the peace he had given her. But tonight was not that night. Tonight, something moved through Red Valley that had no name a decent person would say aloud. She had stayed late to recount a flour shipment that arrived 2 sacks short. She was making notes in the ledger when the bell above the door jingled and a man she didn't recognize stepped inside. Lean, dusty, the look of someone who had ridden hard from somewhere he didn't want to be. He dropped an envelope on the counter without looking at her, the kind of man who looked through women as though they were windows, and said it needed to reach Sheriff Wade. Personal. Urgent. "I'll make sure he gets it," Lily said. He nodded and turned. But as he turned, the envelope slipped from the edge of the counter and hit the floor at an angle that tore the wax seal clean open. The letter inside slid halfway out, face up, plain as day. Lily's eyes moved across the words before her mind could tell them not to. She saw the name Brent Dawson signed at the bottom in a slanted, confident hand. She saw a sum of money large enough to make her throat tighten. She saw 3 words that sent cold rushing through her like water in January. Clear the law. The messenger snatched the envelope from the floor before she could read more. He looked at her. His eyes went still and flat as a pond in dead summer. She had time to see calculation cross his face like a shadow. Then he smiled, a smile that meant nothing good, and left without another word. Lily stood behind the counter for a long moment, the broom handle still in her hand. She told herself she had only seen fragments. She told herself she had misread. She told herself that men like Brent Dawson were stories told to frighten people, not real dangers that walked through the front door of a flower-smelling store in a small valley town. She told herself all of this, and she didn't believe a word of it. She finished the ledger. She locked the store. She walked home in the early dark, convincing herself that silence was safety. That if she told no one, nothing would happen. That Dawson's business was not her business, and the best thing an ordinary girl could do was keep her head down and let the big, terrible world sort itself out without her. She was wrong. She would learn exactly how wrong over the next 2 weeks, as the fear she'd buried began growing roots in her sleep. The messenger came back. He watched her from across the street once, from the shade of the livery stable, long enough that she could not pretend it was coincidence. A big-shouldered stranger started sitting at the saloon window that faced the store. She was being watched. She thought about telling her father. Every morning she almost did. But she looked at his gray temples, his tired eyes, the slight tremor in his hands when the weather turned cold, an old injury that never fully healed, and she couldn't add to the weight already pressing him down. She thought about going to the sheriff. But every time she approached the law office, something stopped her feet cold. The way Sheriff Wade sometimes smiled at nothing. The way he'd once said, in a voice too casual to be casual, Red Valley's a quiet place. Best it stays that way. She did not trust him. The knowing sat in her chest like a stone, and she had learned long ago to trust that weight. So she stayed quiet. And she kept working. And she smiled at customers and pretended the world was fine. She had been pretending since she was 8 years old, and a woman named Margaret Hart stopped breathing and left a little girl alone with a heartbroken man and a lantern in the window. But pretending only holds so long. On the evening the world changed, Lily stepped out the side door into the alley behind the store to empty the dustbin, and the dark swallowed her almost immediately. She had walked that alley 100 times. But hands came out of the dark before she could scream. One grabbed her arm and wrenched it behind her. Another covered her mouth for just a second, long enough to see the third man step into her line of sight with a length of rope. She twisted. She kicked. Her shoe connected with something, and a man cursed and tightened his grip with the fury of someone who'd been hurt and was angry about it. The rope went around her wrists. They dragged her. Her heels dug into the ground. Her voice, when it finally broke free, rang out across the valley like a struck bell, high and broken and desperate, and then one of the men cuffed her hard enough to make the world tilt sideways, and her scream became a sob. 3 men. 1 wagon, waiting in the shadows near the trees. A rifle held by the quietest of them, a quiet that was its own kind of violence. She was fighting. God, she was fighting. With everything in her, every ounce of strength in her small frame, every instinct born from 11 years of surviving things that should have broken her. Her fingers clawed at the rope. Her knees buckled deliberately, forcing them to drag her dead weight. She fought because Lily Hart was her father's daughter, and Henry Hart had never once given up on anything in his whole long, tired, faithful life. She did not know, in that moment, that someone was watching. Cole Maddox had been many things in his 34 years on this earth, none of them easy, most of them honest. Ranch hand at 14. Soldier at 19, riding into conflicts that other men had started for reasons that shrank and paled once the smoke cleared. Lawman for 6 years after that, in a town called Archer Springs, until the law he was sworn to became something he couldn't stand behind anymore. And drifter for the years since. Moving. Never staying. Living from saddlebags and borrowed bunkhouses, earning meals with work and leaving before anyone could ask him something too personal. He had developed a talent for arriving and departing without leaving much of himself behind. He kept his heart in a quiet room inside him that he rarely unlocked. He told himself this was freedom. On the worst nights, sitting alone beside a fire that gave no company, he admitted to himself it was something else. It was penance. A man walking in circles around the thing he should have done once and didn't. 7 years ago, in a town called Milford Creek, Cole had heard a woman screaming in the alley behind the saloon. He was deputy at the time. He was tired. He told himself it was a domestic dispute, not his place. He poured another drink and stayed in his chair. By morning she was gone, taken by the same outfit he had reported to the sheriff twice and been told to leave alone both times. He never found out what happened to her. Her name was Clara. She had a daughter. And not knowing was the stone he carried in the center of his chest every single waking day. He had never stayed in his chair again. So when Lily's scream cut through the evening air above Red Valley, sharp and real and full of the particular terror a body produces when it understands it is in mortal danger, Cole Maddox was already moving before the echo finished rolling across the hills. His horse was already turned. His hand was already dropping to the revolver on his hip. Some part of him that lived below thought and above instinct had decided, immediately and without discussion. Not again. He found them through the brush. 3 men. 1 woman. Rope. Rifle. Wagon. He sat still on his horse and let his eyes do the work his heart was already finished with. He counted the man. He read the rifle. He read the situation the way a man who has seen violence learns to read it, not like words on a page but like weather in the air. He rode into the clearing without shouting, without warning, with the quiet, deliberate calm of a man who has already decided the outcome and is simply arriving to make it official. The wagon driver saw him first, then the rifleman, then the leader, a tall man with a scar riding high across his left cheek, the kind of scar that has a long and bad story behind it. The leader's hand moved for his gun. His mouth pulled into a slow, contemptuous grin. "Turn around, cowboy. This ain't your business." Cole's voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the men had to strain to hear it, and that quietness was its own kind of warning. "Let her go." The leader opened his mouth. Cole's shot was clean and immediate. The driver toppled from the wagon seat. The horses screamed and reared, and in the fractured second of chaos that followed, the loosened grip, the stumbling feet, Cole was already off his horse, knife already in hand, already moving. The rope fell away from Lily's wrists. She gasped. Her hands came free and she pressed them to her chest as if she needed to feel that they were still hers. "Run behind me," Cole said without turning around. One of the outlaws lunged. Cole moved faster, grabbed him by the collar and drove him hard into the ground. The second outlaw raised his rifle at Cole's back. Lily screamed his name, Cole, even though she had never heard it, even though she didn't know it. Her mouth simply formed the word because it felt like the right one. The true one. Cole rolled. The shot exploded into the dirt where his skull had been. He came up with his revolver and fired once. The second outlaw fell. Then there was only the leader. And the leader had Lily. He had moved around behind her in the confusion, one arm across her shoulders, a blade at her throat. His breathing was fast. His eyes were wide with the particular madness of a man whose plan is failing and who is deciding, in real time, how far he is willing to go. Cole went absolutely still. He aimed at the leader's face and let the world go quiet. The wind stopped. The horses settled. The night held its breath. Let her go. A river stone. Smooth and cold and immovable. If you fire, she dies first. Cole heard the crack in the man's voice on the last word. Not fear exactly. The sound of a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't fully committed to. Cole knew that sound. He had heard it before, in other desperate men, in other terrible moments. It was the sound of hesitation disguised as confidence. Lily looked at Cole across the small, terrible distance between them. With the knife at her throat, in the dust in her hair, and the tears drying on her face, something passed between them in that look. Not words. Not yet anything that had a name. Simply recognition, the sudden, stunning sense of being seen by someone at the exact moment when you needed to be seen most. She felt his steadiness as though it were a physical thing she could lean against and not fall. She did not beg. She did not close her eyes. She twisted. Just her arm. Just for a single, precise, courageous second. She found a half-inch of space between herself and the blade, and she used it, not to escape, but to give Cole what he needed. He fired. The leader fell. Lily's legs gave out and she dropped to her knees in the dust, and the sound that came out of her was not exactly crying. It was something older than crying, something that lives in a person until fear finally releases it and the body needs somewhere for it to go. A long, shaking exhale. And then the tears. Clean tears. Relief tears. The kind that heal. Cole was beside her before the sound finished. He knelt in the dirt without any concern for his knees or his dignity and checked her hands, her face, her wrists. His eyes moved fast and thorough. "Are you hurt? Can you move your fingers?" She looked up at him. In the moonlight, his face was road-weathered and hard-angled in entirely, completely present, not looking away, not calculating his next move, just here, just with her, just in this moment that was the only moment either of them had. "Thank you," she whispered. It felt impossibly small for everything she meant by it. Cole sat back on his heels and let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding since the moment he first heard her scream. He looked out at the clearing, then back at her. "Can you stand?" She could. With his hand at her elbow, she could. She stood in the dusty clearing with torn sleeves and trembling legs and something ancient and determined in her face, and Cole Maddox felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the world had something in it worth protecting. "You're safe now," he said softly. He did not entirely believe it. Her eyes told him she didn't either. But it was true for right now. For this moment. And sometimes a moment is everything. The town was quiet as a held breath when Cole rode in with Lily leaning against his chest. He kept one arm loose around her, not caging her, just steady, in case the shock made her slip. She didn't slip. She held the saddle horn and kept her eyes forward, and even in the aftermath of what had been done to her, there was a dignity in her posture that made something ache quietly in Cole's chest. Henry Hart opened the door before Cole even knocked. He must have heard the hoofbeats. Or maybe he felt something in the air, the particular knowledge a father carries about his child, that frequency no science has ever fully explained. He opened the door and his face did something that had no name in any language Cole had ever spoken. His eyes took in his daughter, the torn sleeve, the rope burns, the dirt, the look in her eyes that was relief wrapped around something that had not yet stopped shaking, and the sound that came from deep in Henry Hart's chest was not a word. It was older than words. It was what a heart sounds like when it breaks and floods with gratitude at the exact same moment. He pulled her into his arms. She let herself be held. For a long moment she simply let herself be 8 years old again, small and frightened and completely safe because her father was there and the lantern was in the window and home was real. Cole stood on the porch and looked at the dark road and felt the particular loneliness of a man watching other people's love. Not with bitterness. Just with the quiet understanding that it was something he had not yet found his way to. Then Henry looked at him over Lily's shoulder, and in Henry's eyes was something Cole had not expected. Not just gratitude. Recognition. The look of one good man seeing another. "Come inside," Henry said. "Tell me everything." They sat at the small table in the warm glow of the store, shelves of canned goods and tools and fabrics lining the walls, the smell of wood smoke and old timber holding them in. Lily told them what she had told no one for 2 weeks, the letter, the name, the cold flat eyes of the messenger, the weeks of surveillance. Her voice held steady for most of it. It only broke once, on the words "I thought if I stayed quiet it would pass," because she knew now, with rope burns on her wrists, exactly how wrong that had been. Cole listened without interrupting. He registered every detail, not just the information, but the courage it took to say it. The sharpness of a woman who had seen something dangerous and known it immediately for what it was. When she finished, the name hung between all three of them. Brent Dawson. Cole had heard the stories for years. Dawson had started as a catwoman in Texas, successful by most accounts. Something had broken in him, a drought, A bad deal, some old wound that festered into permanent fury at the world, and he had transformed, over a decade, into something that operated outside every law human civilization had tried to build. He didn't rob towns. He absorbed them. He found vulnerable places, far from major settlements, and made them his. He preferred small ones. Places where screams didn't carry to ears that mattered. Places like Red Valley. The letter said Dawson was planning something here, Lily said. Something large. He wanted the sheriff to clear the deputies from the surrounding towns, give Dawson a window. Red Valley sits between three major trade routes. Whoever controls it controls all commerce in and out of this region. She paused. And I saw that letter. I'm the thread that unravels everything. The cold in Cole's chest was not fear. It was recognition. Why didn't you tell me? Henry asked his daughter, and his voice had no accusation, only the ache of wishing he could have helped sooner. I didn't want to scare you, Papa. She looked at his hands. You've been so tired. Lily. Henry covered her hands with his. There is nothing you could bring me that I wouldn't want to carry with you. Nothing. She looked at his hands over hers and nodded, slowly, because some things between a parent and a child are felt and not spoken. Cole let them have the moment. Then he straightened. Dawson sent 3 men tonight and they failed. By morning, he'll know. Men like him don't retreat when they lose the first move. They escalate. He paused. And we cannot go to the sheriff. Henry looked up. Why not? Because the sheriff is already bought. The silence that followed was the silence of a foundation cracking. Henry sat back in his chair. He looked older, suddenly. He looked like a man watching the last safe wall fall away. Wade, he said, almost to himself. I've known Wade for 12 years. People change when the numbers get large enough, Cole said, not without sympathy. Or maybe he was always bendable and Dawson just found the right amount of pressure. Henry rubbed his face. When he looked up, his eyes were wet but steady. What do we do? Cole thought it through, the way he always thought through bad situations, clean and practical, without panic, because the ones who survived were the ones who planned while everyone else was still reacting. There's an old mining cabin in the foothills, hidden between 2 stone cliffs, abandoned. I used to during a storm years ago. Nobody goes there anymore. He looked at Lily. You stay there until we have answers. I don't want to hide while others face danger because of me. I know. He held her gaze steadily. But you're not a coward for staying safe. You're the witness. You're the proof. If Dawson gets to you, he wins. If you stay safe, we have a chance. Lily's jaw was set. Her eyes were considering, the look of a woman who did not accept things easily, but who was also not willing to let pride make decisions when lives were at stake. She nodded. Henry placed a trembling hand on Cole's arm. His eyes were speaking before his mouth could form the words, and when they came they were the most fragile and earnest words Cole had heard in years. Please protect her. She is all I have in this world. Cole nodded. He did not make promises lightly. This one he made without hesitation, because it had already been made in the part of himself that made decisions before his mind caught up with them. Out there in that clearing, he had already decided. He simply nodded and Henry understood. They were almost at the door when Cole saw the shadow. A lantern, swinging slow at the end of the street. He knew that walk before he could see the face. Sheriff Wade. He's coming here. We go out the back. Now. They moved low and fast through the alley, skirting the stable, staying below the lamplight. Cole got Lily onto his horse and mounted behind her and was gathering the reins when the stable door swung open and the lantern light fell across them like a verdict. Sheriff Wade stood in the doorway. A broad man in his 50s, white mustached, eyes with the calculating flatness of a man who had taught himself to feel nothing when it was convenient. He looked at Lily. He looked at Cole. A slow, quiet satisfaction settled across his face. Well, now. Looks like I don't need Henry's help after all. The horse shot forward before Wade had his gun fully raised. The shot cracked behind them, close, far too close, and then they were in the open dark and riding hard, the cold air tearing past them, Lily's grip iron steady on the saddle horn, Cole's arm a bar around her as the horse stretched into a full run. Behind them, Red Valley grew small. Ahead, the foothills waited. The cabin was exactly as Cole remembered, small, gray, patient, tucked into the fold between two stone walls like a secret the mountain had been keeping. He went in first, checked the shadows, assessed the windows. Then he lit the oil lamp on the shelf, still half full, by whatever grace governs abandoned places, and the warm light gathered them in. Lily sat on the edge of the old wooden cot and pulled a blanket around her shoulders. For a moment she simply breathed. Just let herself sit in the amber light and breathe. Cole sat across from her, near the cold fireplace. "Tell me everything you remember from the letter," he said. She did. Every word she could recall, sharpened by 2 weeks of fear into diamond clarity. When she finished, Cole was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you helping me?" Lily asked. Her voice was not accusing. It was genuine, the real, uncertain wonder of someone who has not expected kindness from a stranger and cannot quite trust that it is real. "You don't know me. You didn't have to ride into that clearing." Cole looked at the lamp flame. It moved with the drafts from the old walls, bending, recovering, bending again, always finding its way back. "There was a woman," he said finally. "A long time ago. I heard her screaming and I told myself it wasn't my place." His voice didn't waver, but his jaw tightened. I poured another drink and stayed in my chair. By morning she was gone. I never found out what happened to her. He paused. "I've been paying for that choice every day since." Louis looked at him. Directly, without flinching. "You're a good man," she said simply. "I know that might sound like nothing, but I think you might not believe it about yourself." And I wanted to say it out loud. Cole said nothing, but something shifted in his face, just beneath the surface, and then he stood and moved to check the windows, because he was a man who knew that gratitude sometimes lands in places that have been empty for too long, and standing still inside it is harder than moving. He was at the second window when he heard them. Hoofbeats. More than one horse. Moving with purpose. He blew out the lamp. "Behind the crate," he whispered. "No matter what happens." The scarred man came with 4 others. They split without a word, moving with the coordination of people who had done this before. Cole had already slipped out the back the moment the lamp went dark, using the stone cliff to muffle his steps, placing himself in shadow above the door. He waited. The door kicked open. 2 men entered. One moved toward the crate where Lily crouched in the dark, her heart beating so loud she was certain they could hear it. She pressed herself into the shadow. Her hands shook. She did not make a sound. The outlaw's hand reached toward the crate. A shot cracked from outside. The man dropped. The others spun, but Cole burst through the doorway and tackled him hard. They fought across the floor, close and ugly, no elegance, just desperation, until Cole struck him and he went still. Then the scarred leader stepped inside. Gun aimed at Cole's chest. Satisfied. "You cost me a great deal of trouble tonight," he said. "Dawson will want your head for this." "You're not taking her," Cole said. The leader laughed. "You think you can stop this? We have the sheriff, the men, the guns. Red Valley is already lost. You're just one man. He aimed carefully. Dawson wants the girl alive. But you... The shot came from the doorway. The scarred man's eyes widened. He stumbled and fell. Henry Hart stood in the doorway with a smoking rifle and shaking hands and eyes that burned with the fierce, complete love of a father who had driven through the dark alone, following a corrupt sheriff and a gang of outlaws, to reach the place where his daughter was hiding. Lily crossed the room and buried herself in his arms. He held her so tightly his whole body shook. How? Cole stared. I followed Wade, Henry said, breathless. When he rode to gather the men, I took the back road. I knew where you'd gone. He held his daughter and looked at Cole over her shoulder. I wasn't going to let my girl face this alone. Outside, more hoofbeats. More lights. Cole went to the window and his stomach tightened. A dozen torches, at least. Sheriff Wade and Dawson's full company moving through the hills. We can't fight that many, Henry said. Cole's mind moved fast. The letter. Cedar Ridge. Judge Harlan. Evidence was the only thing Dawson couldn't buy his way around. The letter is in the sheriff's desk, he said. Blue cloth, center drawer. Lily, you're certain? Yes. If we get that to Judge Harlan and Cedar Ridge, this ends. All of it. Henry shook his head. The town's surrounded. Not if we go through the Dry Creek bed. It runs under the ridge and comes up behind the law office. They'll be watching the roads. They won't expect us to ride toward them. He turned to Lily. You and Henry ride to the church on the upper ridge. Wait for me there. First light. If I'm not back. Cole. Just his name. Just her voice saying it, which had already learned, in the span of one terrible evening, how to carry everything she meant by it. He turned. Her eyes were asking him something that wasn't quite a question. Or it was a question and a plea and a statement all pressed into the same look. Promise me, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that he understood exactly what he was promising, not just his return, but everything a return would mean. That whatever had begun when he heard her scream and turned his horse was not a single night's story. That it had roots now. That it would grow. I promise, he said. He meant it the way a man means something when he has spent years not meaning anything at all, and suddenly finds himself meaning everything, all at once. He put Lily up behind her father, both of them on one horse. He stood and watched them go until the dark swallowed them. Then he turned toward Red Valley, alone, and rode into the night. The Dry Creek bed was exactly as he remembered, a low channel of pale cracked earth running beneath the ridge like an old wound, deep enough to keep a man and horse below the sight line. He followed it south, then east, and came up 20 minutes later in the shadow of the back fence behind the sheriff's yard. He went over the fence silently. Picked the lock with the particular efficiency of a past he didn't often discuss. Moved to the desk. Center drawer. Blue cloth. 30 seconds. The letter inside was intact. Dawson's handwriting, Dawson's plan, Dawson's name, and the sheriff's written response tucked beneath it like a receipt. Cole folded both papers and placed them against his chest, inside his coat, close to his heart. The safest place he knew. He was almost to the back door when he heard boots on the porch. He pressed against the wall. The door opened. A young deputy, barely 20, with the look of a man who was beginning to understand that the job he'd signed up for and the job he was actually doing were two entirely different things, stepped inside with a lamp. He saw Cole immediately. They stood looking at each other. Cole put one finger to his lips. He's going to destroy this town, he said quietly. You know it. I can see it in your face. The deputy looked at his badge. Looked at Cole. looked at the badge again. Then he stepped aside and put his back to the wall and held the lamp steady, lighting Cole's path to the door. Cole walked out without another word. Some debts don't need to be spoken to be understood. He found them at the church on the ridge, huddled in the doorway of that leaning, faithful building that had stood through every hard thing Red Valley had ever weathered. Lily saw him coming from a distance, saw the shape of him on horseback against the pre-dawn sky, recognizable in some way she could not fully explain, and she was already moving down the steps before his horse stopped. He swung down from the saddle. She was in front of him. Neither spoke. The wind moved through the dry grass of the churchyard. The first pale line of morning was beginning to show behind the eastern hills, thin and tentative, like a question about to be asked. Cole reached into his coat and held up the letter. Lily's breath left her in a long, wavering exhale. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Her eyes went bright in the almost dawn. "Cedar Ridge," Cole said. "Judge Harlan. We ride at first light." She nodded. And then she did something she had not planned to do, something that lived below planning, below the careful, contained way she had moved through the world since she was 8 years old and learned that love could disappear without warning, and the only way to survive that was to hold yourself together very carefully. She stepped forward and took his hand. Both of hers, around his one. Holding the letter and holding him at once. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would. People say things. I know." He looked at their hands in the early gray light. "I don't." Henry stood at the top of the church steps and looked at the two of them with the ancient, aching knowledge of a man watching something begin. His eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. He had spent 11 years keeping a lantern in the window for two different people, one who had not come back and one who always had, and standing here in the breaking dawn, watching his daughter hold the hand of a man who had ridden into hell and ridden back out for her sake, Henry Hart felt something shift in the long-carrying weight of his grief. Not gone. Never gone. But lighter. Shared. Held between more hands now. They rode to Cedar Ridge by mid-morning. Judge Harlan read the letter twice, then a third time, his wire-rimmed glasses low on his nose, his expression moving from skepticism to gravity to the cold fury of a man who has spent 4 years building justice and has just seen how someone tried to tear it down. He had warrants signed before noon. The federal marshal arrived in Red Valley 2 days later with 12 deputies and a reputation that preceded him by a full day's ride. Sheriff Wade was taken into custody in front of the store he thought he owned. He looked old and small in handcuffs. Dawson's men scattered. Dawson himself was found 40 miles north, already trying to become someone else, and finding, as men like him always eventually find, that cruelty doesn't wash off as easily as a name. He was tried in the fall. The letter was decisive. Red Valley breathed again. Cole stayed. He hadn't planned to. He had lived so long in the posture of leaving that staying felt, at first, like wearing a coat that didn't fit. He kept looking for the exit. Kept expecting the feeling in his chest, that open, undefended feeling that came over him every time Lily looked at him, to resolve into something safer. Something more manageable. It didn't. It grew. One evening, about 3 weeks after the marshals left and the last of Dawson's men had been hauled out of the county, Cole sat on the front step of Hart's Supply as the sun went down behind the dry hills. Henry had gone in early, his hands were aching, the old injury, the autumn cold settling into bones that never fully healed. The store was quiet. The lantern was lit in the window. Lily came out and sat beside him. She did not say anything immediately. She looked at the hills the way she had probably looked at them her whole life, knowing them, belonging to them, being shaped by them in ways she would never be able to fully name. "You're thinking about leaving," she said. Not an accusation. A statement, said the way she said most things, plain and direct and without any artifice at all. Cole thought about denying it. Then he thought about how thoroughly she would see through that, and how being seen through by her was somehow not as uncomfortable as it had always been before. "It's a habit," he said honestly. "What keeps you thinking about staying?" He looked at the lantern. At its steady, unremarkable light that was nevertheless the absolute center of this woman's whole life and her father's whole life, and a promise kept every single day for 11 years. "Something I haven't had before," he said. The words came out carefully, like something being set down after being carried a long time. The feeling that there's a reason to be somewhere specific. That the place matters because of the people in it. Lily turned her head and looked at him. "Is that enough for a man like you?" Cole looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in that clearing when her life hung on a single moment, except that now there was no calculation. Only truth. "It's the best reason I've ever had," he said. She didn't smile. Not exactly. But something in her face did what it sometimes did, a surrendering of the careful distance she maintained, and she leaned her head, very slightly, against his shoulder. The way someone leans against something they have decided to trust. He stayed absolutely, completely still. The sun went the rest of the way down. The stars came out one by one above the open country, sharp and certain. The lantern burned in the window. Henry's voice drifted from somewhere inside the store, humming something low and tuneless, the sound of a man who is quietly content. The West had a way of testing a man's soul. Cole Maddox had ridden into a clearing on a dark evening for no better reason than a scream that wouldn't let him pass, and somehow that single choice had led him here, to a step in front of a store where the lantern burned. To a woman who had rope burns on her wrists and trust in her eyes, and the kind of quiet courage that doesn't announce itself because it simply doesn't know it's remarkable. He had not found a destination. He had found something better. He had found the place where he stopped. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Cole Maddox did not look toward the horizon. He looked at the lantern light, and at the hand resting near his that he was not quite holding yet, that he would hold, that he was already holding in the only way the first night of any real thing can be held, with the whole weight of everything it might become pressing softly against the lightness of what it was right now. He stayed. The lantern burned. And in Red Valley, for the first time in a long time, the night felt like something worth being inside. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, if Cole and Lily and that lantern in the window meant something to you, we'd love for you to hit the like button and subscribe. But more than that, we want to invite you to join our family. Because that's what this community is. Not just a channel, not just stories. A family. People who still believe that courage is real, that love is worth riding into the dark for, that one person standing between another in the night can change everything. Every like, every comment, every new subscriber makes our fire a little larger and our light reach a little further. So join us. We are stronger together. And we are always glad when you find your way home.